Righty, 12:01. So you're very welcome to join us today for our lunchtime webinar in our series of conversations with a mediator. And you may notice I have a mediator with me who's Michael Lang. Say hello, Michael,
Hello, everyone.
who's all the way from Florida. He's got out of bed very early this morning to join us for our conversation with a mediator. Michael, would you like to say a few words about yourself, please, just to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and um, to talk, especially with you, and but also to have the chance to interact with others who are on this recording. So, um, I have I came to mediation accidentally, drawn in actually by clients, and once that happened, I realized that I had found my career, having been a practicing lawyer for a few years. And this was in 1978. So I have been mediating for that time, doing primarily family work initially, and then organizational and workplace conflict as well. Done a few other things, but those are the primary areas in which I've worked. I've had an opportunity, in addition to being a practicing mediator, to be an academic for about 7 or 8 years, working in two different universities, helping to create graduate programs in dispute resolution. And most importantly, right now, I facilitate 7 monthly meetings of our colleagues using the process we're going to probably, I know we'll end up talking about, reflective practice. And that's my professional joy right now, my delight and my learning. That's where I learn so much as well from being with our colleagues from around the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. So, yeah, for those of you present, you please use the chat box there at the side of your screen if you would like to chip in, comment, ask a question of either Michael or me. And down the bottom of your screen, if you move your device, you'll see a react button. And if you do want to um, chip in verbally, you're very welcome to do so. We like to put your camera on, please, if you do contribute with a question or something like that with your voice, and pop your hand up using the react button and the up arrow, and then we'll come to you as quickly as we can. Okay, so Michael, let's start with thinking about what we are as mediators. What's a mediator? What do we do? What are we for?
You know, it was so interesting as I was becoming a mediator. I have 3 children, and they would say, Dad, we kind of know what lawyers do, but what is it that you actually do, and how do you actually do that? And I stumbled back then to figure out how I could describe what a mediator is, why we do what we do, and I think that the way I see my work and the role of mediators is that we have a variety of functions. One function that's really critical is that we step into the middle of a conflict situation. We're willing to put ourselves into the midst of that at the invitation of people who are in conflict. I learned long ago not to insert myself, my children taught me this as well, not to insert myself in a dispute into which I had not been invited. So it does require an invitation, and it does require some boldness and courage on our part, because those conflict situations um, are so profound for the people who are involved. They are intense for the people, regardless of the level of bitterness, anger, discord, confusion, and so on. And so the first thing we do is we are a presence in the midst of that, and we step into that with the knowledge and the skills that we have, and with a completely open mind and with intense curiosity. That's one of the things that's most important that we bring is
Mm,
our curiosity. We're going to talk a little bit later about about the book I've written, but I've I've identified 10 behaviors, and really they are both behaviors and mental, um, um, they're a mindset that I've called attributes. And the first one that I've always thought of as the most important is curiosity. That is an open mind and being very much like the 5-year-old who is voracious in her appetite to learn and to understand and to be wondering about what happens. And then our task is to, the next task, I think, is to offer a measure of hope, not an expectation about what is going to, but the hope that something better can arise out of our participation with the parties. I think that is really important that we have enough experience to know that with the kind that if people bring their best to their participation and we bring our best as mediators, there's the hope that they will achieve some understanding, some insight that will make things better for them, that will improve their circumstance. And then to me, it is a conversation. It is a conversation that we encourage, we support, we don't direct, we don't directly engage in, we are companions to the parties, walking along with them in their conflict situation, but very actively engaged with them by asking lots of questions that help them have the conversation that they would like to have. And that's how I see my role. I know that there are lots of folks who think about it in terms of, well, my job is to help parties reach an agreement. And you haven't heard me yet say anything about agreement. And that's purposeful. Um, and now I want to bring agreement in because I am a hugely pragmatic person and I always have in mind the end result, wanting parties to shape an understanding that suits their circumstance, that suits them individually, that can be a durable, lasting, and effective way of addressing their conflict. But if I bring that as the first thing I look at, then what happens is that becomes my focus.
Mm.
There is, Mike, you may know the source of this, but I heard this once said, and it makes so much sense to me that what we focus on becomes our reality. I think it comes from appreciative inquiry. I'm not sure. And the source, I would love to know the source, but the important thing is that idea. So if I focus on the agreement, then I begin to ignore everything else.
Mm.
If I focus on the conversation and always be mindful that parties come with an end result, a hope for an end result, then there's the likelihood that we will get to that place. But if
Mm.
we don't do the engagement well, then no agreement is likely to emerge.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and I share your ideas about what a mediator is and what we're for, albeit I don't think I could put it so eloquently, Michael. Thank you very much for that. So it reminds me there's a lot of myths and legends about mediation. And I know some of the people on today um, who are sort of less experienced, perhaps recent trainees and so on. It might be helpful just to think about that for a second. So there is this, to my mind, slightly weird perception that it's all about agreement. And we look across people's literature and websites, and I got 93% agreement rate. I got 98% agreement rate. I've even seen 100% agreement rate, people quoted on there. We don't put an agreement rate on there because it's not about the agreement. It's about two people coming to what I consider to be an experiment. It's an experiment in which the catalyst is the moment in which the two people come together. It's the history they bring, it's the expectation, it's the hopes and fears they bring, but also the mediator is a little part of that experiment to catalyze them increasing their awareness of themselves and the other person in that conflict doesn't necessarily, and sometimes quite unhealthily, would it, lead to an agreement. It's not an agreement they need. It's a greater awareness of why they're in disagreement, and that's a good outcome. So we have one of the myths and legends about mediation is it's all about getting an agreement. And I know over in the USA, Michael, as well as here, there's sort of a whole area of mediation which is sailed off a little bit, principally within the legal profession, where the term mediation is used to describe a process which is not so much what we would consider to be mediation. Do you want to say a few words about that, Michael, please?
Yeah, could I say something? I will respond but Mike, I would love to go back to a word that you used that's so critical. That's experiment.
Hmm.
Because experiment, I don't mean we, and I know you don't either, mean that we're toying around with something. This isn't just, the childhood chemistry set and we pour things into vials to see what's going to happen. But we do experiment in this sense that we ask a question and we don't know the answer to the question. And we need to be curious about what happens because the answer to that question, because the question is the experiment or whatever intervention it might be. And then we observe what happens as a result. And we take those results and we use them to create the next experiment and the next and the next and the next. So it's an iterative process that we build on. And I think that your comment is just really so at the heart of what it is that we do. Um, yeah, my colleagues here who talk about mediator opinions and directive mediation, and um, I say to them, you may be offering a valuable service that people really want, but don't call it mediation because it isn't. This is you acting like a mini judge, and you may be hugely helpful to people who are seeking the kind of help that you are offering. Good. Bless you all. That's great. Call it something else, but don't call it mediation because it confuses what it is that others of us do, where we don't offer an opinion. I was saying to somebody the other day, I was trying to recount whether there was any time in over 40 years of practice I ever offered advice or opinion, and I can't come up with one. I just don't believe in it, in its value for the people who work with me. These aren't my values as a mediator. But when I see other people doing this, I cringe for lots of reasons, ethical among them, whether the behavior is ethical, but it's it is it is directed problem solving, and it's purely transactional. It has very little to do with if anything, with the individuals, and everything to do with the outcome. And if people know that there are options, if clients, pardon me, disputants know there are options and this is what they choose, they should be able to choose that. Just as in medicine, people can choose a variety of intervention techniques and strategies to deal with their problem, provided that they understand that they have a choice and that the choice includes this intervention, this, and so on.
Yeah, sure thing. So I would agree. I mean, those services are entirely valuable to somebody who's got a purely financial contractual dispute with their builder or business partner or another company, and they want basically a soft arbitration. It could be called an evaluative settlement conference with the other party, chaired by a practitioner with some expertise in the field. Fine. Great, really useful, probably save you a whole lot of money instead of going to court, and you haven't got the risk, the litigation risk either, and the delay and the stress of a court case. But it's not mediation, it's something else. And I think when you mention about the ethical aspect of giving opinion, for me, the three most basic ethical underpinning columns for what we do are the voluntariness of the process, the confidentiality of the process, and the impartiality of the practitioner. And the minute we give an opinion, you've lost your impartiality. And
Oh,
I'm amazed that people don't see that. It's
they, they're focused on the outcome. And in the same way, I think what happens is that lawyers in particular who come to mediation and who practice in that way bring with them the mindset that applies in the justice system or in the judicial system, the right wrong. So there's a winner, there's a loser. And um, and as a result, it becomes easier to think about stepping in and making a declaration about who is right and who is wrong and who should pay and who should receive. And it's that mindset that leads to the behavior because we have to go back and say, well, why do people do this? They don't do it just because. Let me give you an example of this in terms of mindset. So I moved to Florida and I'd already been a practicing mediator for at least 30 years or so. And I decided I wanted to practice here. And to do so, I had to become certified. And the certification process, put that aside, it didn't matter. There was no grandparenting allowed. Everybody went through the same procedure. And I received my first referral, and I was quite excited. And the lawyer said, so we've set up 2 rooms.
Mhm.
I said, well, okay, in case we need them. No, we've set up 2 rooms. This was a divorce mediation in which the parties were going to be talking about their children and how best to parent them, as well as about a range of financial matters. And I said, well, we need to meet together. They said, well, okay, but just until you finish your introductory comments, and then we move to separate rooms. And that has become this that's the default practice. I had to struggle to persuade people that I could actually manage a conversation in a joint session in which people might get a little hot under the collar and that was okay because that's how they felt and that's what they needed to express to one another. And that except in situations of abuse, and put that aside, of course, or some extreme behavior, we would be fine. Oh, no, it's not very productive. So
Mm.
for whom?
Mm. Yeah,
Whom? For the lawyers or for the parties?
yeah.
I couldn't imagine the idea that I'm trotting from one room to the next to
Mm.
say, how about Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? You pick up the children at this time, and on Tuesday, third, no, well, that time doesn't really work. So now I go back to it's insane. And then I would say to the lawyers, I said, after all is said and done, what do you think happens when the mediation is over? Well, it's all settled, right? They have an agreement. I said, but they got to live with that, don't they? And do you think they're going to be talking to one another once the agreement is implemented? And in terms of implementing the agreement, do you think do you think they might want to talk to each other about how that agreement is formed? No, well, it was it was a mindset that was brought that I understand having been trained as a lawyer. I'm not criticizing the mindset as it applies to the legal system. I'm criticizing it when it's brought into mediation.
Sure thing. Yeah. It brings to mind a case I did. It was something to do with a family business, and the lawyer was present. There was a bad setup from the start. They were doing it in the lawyer's office and the solicitor's office, as we call it over here. And
Mhm.
the one side, if you like, was made to wait for the process to begin in a rather small windowless room. And the other side, who were actually the clients of the solicitor hosting the session, were brought into the beautifully oak paneled drawing room and with a tray of tea. And I commented on, on this initially. Anyway, so we got through that bit, and then we had as is conventional when the solicitors are involved, a round table chat, and then kind of when I got to the end of a sentence or paragraph, the solicitor said, "Okay, now we're going to this." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hang on a second. We don't go into separate rooms." And I began to try and build the dialogue between the two sides, and it was to do with a family business in which one of the family members wanted to break off and go on their own, and it was to do with where the client list and the intellectual property, etc. But the the solicitor hosting it was so uncomfortable. And I remember to this day, she was tapping her papers on the table, saying, "Okay, well, the rooms are ready now. We're ready to get into the separate rooms." And the more she did it, the doggedness in me made sure that we stayed there in the room for as long as I possibly could. And actually, we did the whole thing, and we finished by about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
So that's enough of trashing lawyers. Okay.
No, I don't want to trash the lawyers, but I'm so careful in my critique to be as to use a scalpel, not a hammer, to really say it's not. This is the. Anyway, I think we understand. We'll go on to the
As,
next.
yeah, as well as your legal background, Michael, you're trained in family therapy, and I know from a previous conversation, I've told you, that's my initial profession was in Gestalt psychotherapy. So interesting that we've both come from this similar place in that regard, and into the mediation profession. What do you think is brought, just to put it in the third person, from sort of those that kind of helping profession, psychotherapy? Um, what valuable things do we bring into the mediation field, do you think?
Well, I mean, I was never licensed, so to be clear, the training I did was in order to be a more effective mediator and to be able to understand the human dynamics, not just the lawyer side of problem solving, which was incredibly valuable and still is. Um, but I think that's the piece that is often missing, and that psychotherapy brings to the mediation, and that is the ability to, well, it's two things actually. It's both the ability to have a sense of to be able to make some sense and to do an experiment based on that sense of what's happening in the dynamics that has either led to or or led to the conflict or is inhibiting the party's ability to find some suitable resolution to the dispute. The other thing, and this goes back to the comment before about whether we meet in two rooms or one room and so on, is that I learned how to be in the presence of conflict and not take it on for myself. To be empathetic and compassionate and supportive and as effective as I could as a human being, but realize that um, I could be in the presence of people who were distraught, confused, unsettled, whatever adjective we want to use, and maintain a presence, a calming presence. Not that I try to damp down, but I wouldn't have to be ruffled and upset and worried about about the fact that they were speaking to one another in a way that was awkward or frustrating or angry or whatever it might be.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, it's I like the use of the word presence there, Michael, in particular, and in the way in which I was trained in psychotherapy, we talk about inclusion and presence. Inclusion is the sort of Gestalt version of empathy.
Mhm.
Empathy is very misunderstood, as I think you probably know. And the notion that you can fully experience what somebody else is experiencing, it's not, I don't believe, is possible. Inclusion is to step into somebody's frame of reference, but to be able to step out of it as well in order to yourself be present. and to bring your whole self, to bring that courage and that calmness that you allude to into the room, but occasionally to get into their frame of reference, but sometimes to be back in your frame of reference as the practitioner, as long as you know why you're there, what you're there for, who you are, and to demonstrate that confidence and courage and curiosity that you mentioned at the top of the conversation as well. I want to come back to this idea about not taking it on, and this will lead us into talking about reflective practice, Michael, as well, about not taking on the conflict. I just want to just mention a couple of the comments that have come up as well. We've got somebody saying, yeah, we don't do agreement rates either. A comment from Devika here who says judicial officers say they practice mediation, but what they're actually doing is a hybrid of arbitration. Thank you for that, Devika. Yeah, it's echoing what we were saying a couple of minutes ago. Anthony Matthews takes charge and tells the lawyers that he's running the show, not the other way around. Maybe you'd like to think about this one, Michael, if you would please. Do you think mediation from Devika again is appropriate for moderate to high levels of DV, domestic violence in divorce and family mediations? And if so, what needs to be put in place? Well, I think she's saying there, Devika, about shuttle mediation. I guess you might agree with that, Michael.
Well, yes, I mean, it begins with the planning for the mediation and careful conversations with the parties in advance to ensure that there is a reasonable likelihood that no matter whether they're sitting face to face or in separate rooms, that they can actively participate. And what sort of, doing sort of an assessment of how effective they are likely to be to determine, is this process likely to be useful for them?
Yep.
The work has to begin there. The idea of people in separate rooms is just one critical strategy, but it's certainly not the only one that's essential in working in situations where there's been domestic violence.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure thing. Okay, great. Anthony's also making the point about setting the stage for future communication, especially about parenting, which I think we've sort of mentioned briefly as well. Little conversation going on between Devika and Anthony there. Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. Sometimes the heat is too much and the need is to have a caucus. Okay, so, keeping an eye there, user, keeping an eye on the temperature of the conflict in the room and just ensuring people's safety needs are attended to, of course. Somebody
Can I
said,
comment on that, Mike? Sorry to interrupt you. Can I comment on that? I think that if we see caucus as the default response, and I'm not sure this person who made this comment, so I don't mean to be critical of them. I'm using it as a springboard to make this point, not to react to that individual. Sometimes, yeah, maybe we, separating people into rooms, sort of go to your corners, makes a lot of sense. But that's not the only strategy for helping people who are emotional, who are engaged, who are intensely interacting with one another. And I wouldn't want us, and when I teach, I don't teach that is necessarily the only way. It's one of a number of interventions, and I'm not suggesting that this person is posing it as this is exactly what you always do. But I think it becomes really important for us. This to me is the ability to read and understand the party's situation as best as you point out, Mike, as an outsider, right?
mm,
But to be engaged, to step into the situation and wade in with enough understanding, enough patience, enough ability to listen means that I can decide whether to just intervene by saying, can I just stop you for a second? Pause. I'm curious. When you interact like this, do you find it helpful? Because I don't know you and I'm learning about you. I'm not being critical. I really need to understand. If this is the way in which you talk effectively, helpfully, then we should continue. If it's not, then let's look at other ways to interact. So that's one other way in which, depends on who the parties are, what the situation is, what you know about them. So there are a range of intervention strategies that we can use when people are intense. Let's put it that way. It's because it's not just emotional, although there is that strong emotional component, but where they're intense and maybe their voices are rising and you can almost feel the temperature in the room rise with the heat of their interaction. So,
Okay, cool. Which almost, or just to an extent, address Ellen's comment there about interjecting when in conflict. And I think I want to get on to talking about reflective practice, but I'll just say a brief thing on top of what Michael's just said, Ellen, which is I'll often ask myself as a practitioner, is there dialogue happening? Now, it might be angry dialogue. It may be heated dialogue. It may be dialogue at a high volume. It may be people, to an extent, talking over the end of one another's contributions. It can still be dialogue. And dialogue's a whole subject with a whole philosophy behind it. But the question I would ask is there some dialogue taking place? In which case, I'm inclined to leave it, provided people's safety needs are given, a paramount. So we don't necessarily interject at all, Ellen. And often the interjection will be to get back to the place where they come sort of back into their senses. Because I think sometimes when people are very angry and just want to persecute the other party with the volume of their voice and the things they're saying to them, so I want to get them back into their senses in order that they can have productive dialogue. That would be one of the grounds for interjecting. But okay, all of this, Michael, in terms of what we're talking about, dealing with high conflict situations, the presence of the practitioner, not taking it on, which was one of the things that was the drivers for your own family therapy training. Somebody's characterized, working in these kinds of professions as well as working in therapy, as we're taking people's monkeys onto our shoulders, where we sometimes gather up people's distress and their disaffection, and we carry it around, and we need somewhere to take that. So in terms of sort of developing as practitioners, improving our practice, ensuring we're working ethically, and ensuring that we've got somewhere to take our monkeys, I think these are some of the strands that point us towards the need for reflective practice, which is really your particular these days. And after 40 years odd of working as a practitioner, you produced this very, very fine book, which I have my copy here. Perhaps you'd like to talk about that. Tell us about what's driven you to write the book, and give us an insight into what we might gain by reading it, Michael.
So they thank you. What first got me thinking about this was a role play I did at a professional conference, and you'll find this curious, Mike. The name of the workshop was Ericksonian Hypnotherapy Approaches to Mediation.
Mm.
And because in family therapy I learned a little bit about Milton Erickson, I was intrigued, and I went to the workshop and I volunteered to be the mediator, and I did. And at the end of 20 or 25 minutes of the role play, the presenters put their hands on my shoulders to stop the session and said, that was brilliant, excellent. And the two role players also commented on how I had helped them achieve the particular goal that was set out for this. And people at the conference would say, hey, that was great, good work. Or lawyers don't know how to do what you just did. Where did you learn that? I felt so great. And then I would go back to my room at night and go and say to myself, I haven't the damnedest idea what I did. I don't know why I did what I did. I had no way of making sense of that experience and learning from it. And that set me off on this idea that how can we develop our capacities? How can we move increasingly toward excellence in our work by learning from our experiences? And at that same conference, a friend mentioned this book called The Reflective Practitioner by a man named Donald Shun, and I read that. This was 1985, 86. And so it actually began with a successful experience, but one that still puzzled and troubled me because I didn't understand what had occurred. I knew that there was no way I could replicate what had happened, and so I wanted to figure that out. And what I have learned over the years is that we have an opportunity to really learn from our experience. And the best way in which we can learn from it is through a process of self-exploration, through reflective practice. A lot of the work that's done in supervision or mentoring is more directive. People present a problem, and if it's in a group, I have friends who run groups like this. They'll have a group, somebody presents a problem, and they go around the circle, and everybody presents a solution to the problem. Well, that's well-meaning and sometimes can be hugely helpful. But our approach starts with the belief that the answer really almost always lies within the person. Sometimes additional information and advice is useful, but by and large, it does. So we don't offer advice. We ask people questions. And this is something that we can do for ourselves. In my book, there are some self-reflective guides, not just working in groups, although working in groups has a power and effectiveness that is extraordinary. And its demonstrated ability to really intensify the learning is very clear. And so we ask people questions to help them explore the dilemma that's theirs. You know, just as you mentioned earlier, Mike, about the idea that we can have a desire to understand and be concerned with other people's experience. What we could use the word empathy, which I understand, I accept has its challenges, but we can never really understand what that person's experience was like. And my one way in which we talk about this, my colleague Susan Terry has said the reason that we don't offer advice is because that person has their own brain and they can think for themselves. I wasn't there. I didn't have the experience that they had. And very importantly, I don't think the way they think. I don't mediate the way they mediate. So if I give them advice, it comes from my experience, my values, my belief, well intended, and it could be great advice, just not relevant and particularly useful. In the same way that in mediation, if we offer advice to people, it's from our perspective. It isn't as much as we want to understand theirs. It may not be really useful to them because they are unique folks. They think differently. They think uniquely for themselves. So the goal of reflective practice is to learn from our experience. And as we learn from our experience, we enhance our capacity to do the work. And sometimes the problems are, as in my first experience, people are puzzled over something that went well. In fact, I was doing a co-facilitating a reflective practice group of UK mediators earlier this week. And the two people who were presenting were actually talking about successful interventions and wanting to understand more about what was it that they did, What was it first of all, what was it that they saw and understood about what was happening that led them to take this action that led to a successful outcome? So that's the way we function. The idea is self-exploration leads to self-discovery, and self-discovery is the most enduring and meaningful way in which we can learn.
Mm. Excellent. And I like the idea. I love the idea of what you would do as a group facilitator, as a reflective practitioner, as a facilitator of reflective practice groups. To me, it's kind of showing, not telling, what a mediator is and what a mediator does.
Yes,
So you're paralleling the process with which you would work with clients in conflict. You're paralleling that process when you are facilitating the group of mediators who are working with clients in conflict. And I love that parallel process. And as we know, showing is always much more potent than telling.
right.
And actually to be in that way of being with mediators at whatever stage of their development, I think is excellent. Um, the terms supervision and mentoring, consultative support is a phrase I've heard as well for the kinds of groups that you mentioned there, where it's more about fixing a problem or solving a problem or giving solutions, and even like you say, going around the group. It's slightly different, or quite a different animal to a reflective practice group. I've run groups myself for 25 years or so for various reasons. One of my possibly the favorite part of my semi-retired role is running supervision groups, running groups of reflective practice. I wouldn't suggest it's on the level that you're talking about in the group, but in the book. But to have people come, I feel excited about those groups of people come along with their stories of their experience or working with clients. And what we ask them to bring is your story, not the client's story. They worked in this company for 25 years and they used to be friends with this other person. And then this happened. Then there was a restructure. And then this happened in the company. Ooh, don't want to know. I want to know the practitioner's story.
Right.
How was it to meet these people? What did you feel like? What did you do and why? And where did that take you? And then, as you mentioned in the about the people presenting in the way that you just described. What, not just um, when the mediation didn't work or you didn't feel it was being successful or effective or bringing about the outcome that the parties wanted, but sometimes when things do work,
Right.
why do you suppose that worked?
Right. Because there's learning in all of that. And for me, it is, I'll take two things. One, we as mediators um, love stories. It's the heart of our work. And we want our clients to be telling us stories. We need a certain level of detail, and all of that is wonderful. What happens in the reflective practice groups is that if there's too much time spent on that kind of storytelling that you just described, it obscures, it doesn't leave enough room for what the mediator's experience was. And then when the group members participate, they end up focusing more on the details of the story instead of on the mediator's experience. So we try to we encourage people to state the question that they want to address. What's the puzzling situation? Give us a little bit of context for it. How many people in the room? What was the issue about? And then we explore when they first experienced this puzzling situation. What was happening? What was going on in that moment? What was happening for you? What did you do? How did they respond? And what did you make of their response? Those are the kinds
Yeah,
of questions that we're interested in.
excellent. Now,
Yeah,
Michael,
go-
you've been generous enough to give access to a video of a reflective practice session that you do with an individual, which I've watched and really enjoyed. We're going to put in the chat box a link for that. It's not generally available, and we're just going to make it available for a month. The link has just appeared there, so it's only through us that you can get to this it's hosted in a private space on YouTube. So you won't get it by searching. You have to go through that link. So that's there for a month, and you'll see Michael Lang in action, demonstrating some reflective practice, and really get a sense of how that kind of work progresses. I want to come back to a couple of the
Can I
comments.
say something? May I
Please do,
just say
Michael. Yeah.
something about the video, please? Because
Yeah.
I'm quite sensitive about this, as we all are. If you can imagine, watching a video of colleagues. Um, this was part of a much longer program. The people involved are actually members of a reflective practice group that I've been working with now for over 4 years. They agreed to do this so that there would be a video record. There would be the ability to see, not just tell, or to show, not just tell. And we need to recognize that they're doing this for our collective learning, and treat the video and your experience of it with respect. Don't talk about it. Don't share the link with people who might not have the same sensibility that we do about confidentiality and privilege, because the person who's presenting a dilemma is presenting an actual, not a made up scenario. It's a real conflict situation that she's describing. And the other people you'll see in the video are members of the group, and you'll see mostly how I interact, and the kind of questions I use, but also ways you'll see the group members interacting with the person who's presenting a dilemma.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I absolutely share your sensitivities about that. And yeah, so people, please have a look, view it in the context Michael's just described, and keep it to yourself as well, please. Just to come back to a couple more of the comments. There's a nice short question from Yaya. Yaya, there is not a short answer to that, but is there a difference between dialogue and communication in mediation? There is indeed. And scarily, we're pretty well out of time, and there's no way I could get started on that. But I think when you see people who are fully in psychological contact, when people are in intense psychological contact with each other, which might be angry contact, it might be sad contact, it might be loving contact, they're speaking from I, and they're speaking about you. They're having an I-you dialogue. If you want to read some stuff about this, if you can't wait for my book, which I can't wait for my book, I haven't finished it yet. Hopefully this year. If you look up anything by Martin Buber, Buber, on the philosophy of dialogue and communication in the context of sort of people being able to step into one another's realities and have an I-you dialogue, that's kind of what I'm talking about. But in much simpler terms, when people feel as it when you're in the present moment, speaking I and you and referencing your needs and somebody else's needs, when there's some even a grain of empathy between the two parties, but they're also talking from their own sort of hopes and fears, thoughts and feelings with I, then we're having dialogue. So it is very different to just communication, but that's the shortest answer I can give just now. We scarily are pretty well out of time. This time flies. So really, I'd love to give you a last word, Michael. Would you like to leave us with something, anything at all, on this Valentine's Day 2025 across the Atlantic Ocean?
Should I say something as trite as go out and love one another? I don't know, Mike. That's a very look, first of all, even if this weren't recorded, I really loved the conversation that we had. And the opportunity to share ideas and to talk together about this. And also recognizing that this is a platform, an opportunity for me to talk about reflective practice, and wanting to encourage people to engage with us, and learn more about reflective practice and participate in groups, because the aim is for us to be the best practitioners possible. I think there's one other piece I want to add very quickly, which is that in our groups, we have people who do all kinds of, it's not just limited to certain types of disputes. It's not limited to certain types of theories. People who subscribe to narrative or who are directive or who are facilitative or who call themselves transformative. We don't offer a philosophy about what's right, the right way to do mediation. We help each person be the best at what they consider to be mediation and how they want to practice rather than trying to change the way they do things. We don't have that kind of a model. So I would really hope that what people will take away from the recording and the folks who are here today is that there is a way in which we can become more adept and resourceful at our work.
Excellent. Brilliant. Lovely closing words, Michael. Thank you very, very much for that and for your time today. A couple of people saying, thanking us and also asking about the title of the book, which we popped into the chat box now. So do check out that book. And from UK Mediation, do check out our other webinars. There's a whole library of webinars in the resource section on the website where you can, this will be, along with a lot of other recordings, all types of topics that we've covered. There'll be more conversations with the mediator in future. Thank you very much. I hope you're doing something loving and lovely for Valentine's Day. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye for now, and bye to Michael.
For now, Mike, thanks.
Cheers.